The North Atlantic, the 5th of November, 1940. The light is failing. Somewhere in the grey swell approximately 755 nautical miles south-southwest of Reykjavik, 37 merchant ships are holding their convoy lines, laden with the cargo Britain desperately needs to survive. Watching over all of them is a single escort, a converted passenger liner that spent most of her life ferrying emigrants to Australia. She carries 7 guns, all of them cast in the 19th century. Her captain has no illusions about what his ship is. Neither does anyone else. Critics of the convoy system noted her class with something close to embarrassment. She is armed merchant cruiser HMS Jervis Bay, pennant F-40, and on paper she is barely a warship at all. On this particular evening, steaming toward her at 23 knots, is one of the most capable surface raiders in the German fleet. Jervis Bay fought for roughly 20 minutes. In that time, one humble converted liner changed the arithmetic of the entire engagement, and saved 32 ships that nobody expected her to save. This is how. To understand what Jervis Bay was doing in that position, you have to understand the broader crisis gripping Britain's Atlantic lifeline in the autumn of 1940. The U-boat war was intensifying. Surface raiders posed an additional threat that the Royal Navy could not comfortably ignore. The answer, insofar as there was one, was the convoy system, grouping merchant ships together to reduce the comparative size of the defensive perimeter relative to the number of ships enclosed. Admiralty planners had established that larger convoys were proportionally easier to defend than smaller ones, which is why the convoy Jervis Bay was escorting had been formed by merging 2 separate groups, a Bermuda convoy, coded BHX, joined at sea with a Halifax convoy coded HX, producing the combined body designated convoy HX-84. 38 merchant ships had departed Halifax on the 28th of October, 1940. Jervis Bay was their sole armed escort. She had left Bermuda's Albuquerque Point, spent a brief period under repair at Halifax, Nova Scotia, and now found herself the only thing standing between those 38 hulls and whatever the Atlantic might produce. What the Atlantic produced on the 5th of November was the German heavy cruiser Admiral Scheer. Named after the Imperial German admiral who commanded the high seas fleet at Jutland, the Scheer was a pocket battleship of the Deutschland class, built in the 1930s specifically to operate as a commerce raider within the constraints imposed by treaty. She carried 6 28cm or 11-inch guns arranged in 2 triple turrets. Her secondary armament comprised 8 15cm guns. She could make 30 knots. Her armor was proof against anything Jervis Bay carried. On paper, Admiral Scheer was a warship. On paper, Jervis Bay was a liner with guns bolted to her decks. On paper, the 7 6-inch guns Jervis Bay had been given when the Royal Navy requisitioned her in August 1939 were already 41 years old. They were 1898 vintage BL 6-inch pieces in single center pivot mountings, fitted with open-backed shields, adequate to deflect blast and splinters at best, offering nothing approaching the protection of a proper gun position on a fighting warship. The 2 additional QF 3-inch anti-aircraft guns she carried were of 1894 design, 46 years old at the time of the battle. The ship's broadside amounted to 4 6-inch guns firing on a single bearing, with a further 2 capable of contributing with the 3-inch weapons in an emergency. Admiral Scheer's main guns could hurl an 11-inch shell to ranges that Jervis Bay's 6-inch guns could not begin to match. Any exchange of fire would not be a duel. It would be execution. The German captain, Kapitän C. Theodor Krancke, had already spent much of that afternoon managing an unexpected delay. Earlier in the day, at 9:40 hours, the Admiral Scheer had launched her Arado R-196 seaplane on a reconnaissance sweep, 100 nautical miles wide and 70 nautical miles deep. When the aircraft returned at 12:05, the observer reported a convoy steaming eastbound, spotted at position 52 degrees 41 minutes north, 32 degrees 52 minutes west. The intervening distance to the convoy was approximately 90 nautical miles. No escort had been observed from the air, a piece of intelligence that would shortly prove dangerously incomplete. Krancke faced a command decision: attack before nightfall or wait for dawn. He chose to attack. Admiral Scheer altered course to 150 degrees and increased speed to 23 knots, timing an interception for approximately 15:30. But at 14:27, a single smoke column was sighted well ahead of the convoy, the cargo liner Mopan, steaming independently and roughly 3 hours ahead of HX-84. Uncertain of the vessel's identity but unwilling to break off his approach, Krancke held course, trained his armament on Mopan, and fired warning shots from his secondary 15-centimeter guns. At 15:08, he ordered Mopan by signal lamp to heave to. The evacuation and subsequent sinking of Mopan consumed the time that Krancke had budgeted for his interception. Mopan finally went under at 16:05. Nearly 2 hours had been lost, and dusk was closing in as Admiral Scheer pressed on toward HX-84, a situation the convoy source material records caused Krancke significant annoyance. It was into this context, a raider already irritable, already behind schedule, approaching a convoy in fading light, that Jervis Bay's captain made the decision that defined everything that followed. Captain Edward Stephen Fogarty Fegen had served in the Royal Navy for nearly 40 years. He was, according to Vice Admiral Kennedy Purvis, who spoke at the Bermuda Memorial a year later, the only Royal Naval officer aboard a ship otherwise manned predominantly by Royal Naval Reserve and Mercantile Marine personnel. He understood his ship's limitations completely. He also understood his duty. The moment the strange warship was identified as German, one of the pocket battleships, Fegen acted without hesitation. He instructed the convoy commodore to turn the convoy to starboard and scatter, deploying smoke floats. Fegen took Jervis Bay out to port, ahead of the convoy, turning directly toward the Admiral Scheer. He placed his ship between the raider and the 38 vessels in his care. There is something worth sitting within that geometry. One converted liner, positioning herself as a shield. If you find yourself drawn to stories of how the Royal Navy transformed the overlooked into the decisive, subscribing to this channel ensures you won't miss the next one. At approximately 15:30 hours, as Admiral Scheer closed with the convoy, the action began. The range at which she opened fire meant that Jervis Bay was absorbing punishment before she could reply effectively with her own guns. Krancke, incensed by the approach of the British vessel after the delays already suffered, was determined to destroy her quickly and get to the merchantman beyond. Admiral Scheer's 11-inch shells found Jervis Bay with brutal efficiency. The ship was heavily straddled and struck. Fires broke out. Captain Fegen was wounded. Still he held his course. Jervis Bay's own 6-inch guns opened fire as she came within range, not with any realistic prospect of inflicting serious damage on an armored warship, but to complicate the Germans' gunnery, to draw the raiders' attention, to buy time measured in minutes. The fire tearing through Jervis Bay's unprotected decks killed crewmen around their guns. The open-backed shields on those 1898 vintage mountings offered little. The ship became, as Kennedy Purvis later described it at the Bermuda Memorial, a blazing wreck. Fegen, wounded and with his command disintegrating around him, continued to fight. The guns kept firing. After approximately 20 minutes of fighting, Jervis Bay went down. Of her crew of 254, 190 were lost. Captain Fegen went down with his ship. 68 survivors were eventually recovered from the North Atlantic by the neutral Swedish vessel Stockholm, though 3 of those survivors later died of their wounds. Among those who lived was a man named Guy Byam, who would later serve as a BBC correspondent before being killed covering an air raid over Germany. The Victoria Cross citation awarded posthumously to Captain Fegen reads, in part, for valor in challenging hopeless odds and giving his life to save the many ships it was his duty to protect. The citation goes on to note that, crippled and in flames, unable to reply, Jervis Bay held the Germans' fire for nearly an hour. The action itself lasted approximately 20 minutes of actual fighting. The broader engagement during which Scheer's attention was consumed by Jervis Bay extended further, and both figures appear in the historical record depending on the measure applied. What is not in dispute is what happened to the convoy. By the time Admiral Scheer had dealt with Jervis Bay and was free to pursue the scattering merchantmen, the ships of HX-84 were spread across a wide area of ocean in deteriorating light. Krancke could only chase what he could find. He found some. Maiden, Truillard, Kenbane Head, and Fresno City were sunk. The tanker San Dimitrio was badly damaged and abandoned by her crew, though 2 days later some of those same crewmen, adrift in lifeboats, spotted San Dimitrio still afloat and still smoldering, reboarded her, got her engines running, and brought her into port, an episode that became the basis for the 1943 film San Dimitrio, London. The largest ship in a convoy, HMS Ranjitiki, carrying 230 crew and 25 passengers including women and children, was straddled by heavy shells and escaped without a single casualty. Her radio officer transmitted a warning signal that was picked up and relayed by a station on Long Island. In the final accounting, Admiral Scheer sank 6 of the 38 ships in Convoy HX 84. 32 reached home. The Beaverford story deserves brief mention because it circulated widely after the war. Claims were made that the armed freighter SS Beaverford engaged Admiral Scheer in a gunnery duel lasting over 4 hours, allowing the convoy to escape. Krancke's own post-war account contradicts this entirely. He paid generous tribute to the courage of Jervis Bay, and noted a small burning freighter that returned fire just before she sank, almost certainly Kenbane Head. Beaverford he describes only as a timber-laden vessel caught fleeing south at speed, torpedoed to preserve ammunition after gunfire proved slow to finish her, with no record of any sustained engagement or return fire. The captain's log of Fresno City, herself fleeing, recorded the Beaverford burning at a bearing of 110 degrees, approximately 10 miles distant. The timeline leaves no room for a 4-hour battle. The strategic consequences of the action extended beyond the fate of HX-84. The engagement demonstrated, in the starkest possible terms, both the value and the limits of the armed merchant cruiser concept. A converted liner could not fight a pocket battleship. But she could make it expensive, in time and attention, for that pocket battleship to do its real work. The cost of that lesson was paid by Fegen and the 189 others who did not come home. Monuments followed. At Albury's Point in Hamilton, Bermuda, from where Jervis Bay had departed on her final sailing, a memorial was unveiled on exactly the 5th of November, 1941, the first anniversary of the action, in front of a guard of honor drawn from HMS Dispatcher's Royal Marines Detachment. In St. John, New Brunswick, Canada, where Jervis Bay had been refitted for war service in the summer of 1940, a monument was raised at Ross Memorial Park. The town of Owen Sound, Ontario dedicated a park in 1941 to the ship and to Stoker A.M. Johnson of the Royal Canadian Naval Reserve, a resident of Owen Sound who was among the dead. In Scotland, the town of Wick erected a plaque in 2006, acknowledging that Jervis Bay had drawn extensively from the men of Caithness. In London, the principal room of the Merchant Navy Hotel was known for decades as the Jervis Bay Room, where the custom was for everyone entering to salute the display. The Australian poet Michael Thwaites, serving as a naval officer in the Atlantic in 1941, wrote a ballad about the ship. The Victoria Cross citation, which describes Jervis Bay holding the Germans' fire while crippled and in flames, captures something true about the engagement even in its generous phrasing. Fegen had known, from the moment the enemy's profile resolved on the horizon, that there was only one outcome for his ship. He steered toward it anyway, because the mathematics were clear: one ship lost was a price worth paying if 32 went home. She was launched in 1922 as an emigrant liner. She spent her working life carrying passengers on the Australian run at 16 knots, first under the Commonwealth Line, then under the Aberdeen and Commonwealth Line after the White Star Organisation absorbed her in 1928. She was converted to a one-class tourist ship in 1931. She was requisitioned in August 1939 and given guns older than the century. She rammed a destroyer at Rosyth in October of that year, putting HMS Sabre under repair for 6 months, which is perhaps the most honest measure of how ready she was for a fight. Nobody would have called Jervis Bay a formidable warship. Nobody who understood tonnage, armament, armor, or range would have given her a serious chance against the ship that sank her. She bought 20 minutes. In those 20 minutes, 32 ships reached home. And nobody, not the critics, not the accountants, not the convoy planners who had bundled her into the escort role as the only option available, ever again called her humble without also saying her name with something approaching reverence. If the story of HMS Jervis Bay and Convoy HX-84 is the kind of naval history you're here for, a subscription and a turn-on notification bell means the next ship's story finds you the moment it arrives. Thank you for watching.